I want to thank the dedicated 76ers medias here today. Obviously, there's some other big things happening in the sports world right now. But I wanted to start thanking Caleb, KJ, Reggie, and Pete Nance. Obviously, they've given us a lot of great minutes and became fan favorites pretty quickly. But we really love what we've added. Primarily, obviously, Quentin Grimes was a key addition. We love his fit with Tyrese. His ability to hit shots, his ability to be the primary defender of the guards on the perimeter. Jared we see as someone who can really help us down the road as well. He's still in the early stages of his career. But one of the general themes we wanted to do at this deadline was add, get younger, get more dynamic. That's something that I feel like, just as we're always assessing ourselves and last off season, obviously things haven't gone according to plan, mostly with injuries. But I also think we were a little bit on the older side with a lot of the acquisitions of our role players, and we want to get younger both now and into the future. So I'll turn to questions.
Brian, why do you think, he seems like a guy, even going back to the next week, he's got kind of a projectable skill set. Why is it that he hasn't snuck anywhere, and why do you think he was available for you?
Yeah, we look closely at that because he has been moved, quite a few times, which sometimes can be a bit of something to investigate. But if you look at all those moves, and I think folks have, they were a lot very like CBA cap type moves in the other trades. This one became more of a player for player, where they were looking for a player more like Caleb, and we thought Grimes was a little bit better fit here. I think they're both very good players.
Daryl, when you guys signed KJ last offseason, I think the general consensus was you're giving him that contract specifically for opening up options of trades and other things down the road. Why do you think you ended up having to give Detroit things to get off the contract, and how do you think that helps you guys into the future?
Yeah, so with KJ, we both felt like he could help us, and to your point, would be a potential path for us to upgrade the team primarily this year. I think this is where, if you look at all our trades in whole, and I understand they unfold, like one happens now, one happens the next day, one happens later. But we were sort of looking at a holistic plan of both getting younger, getting players we think are ones that can help us now and into the future, and also create flexibility to keep the key players on this team going forward. And we prioritize that over, what KJ CBA was able to do from a trade perspective to, upgrade the team now. We felt like setting ourselves up. I think we have to be realistic. I'll take a step back. This has been a disappointing year, and primarily injuries. I think Nick, Tyrese, I would say those two primarily, but then the rest of the roster as well, have kept us in the spot where we can fight for the playoffs, and our goal is to fight with the playoffs. We had a plan going to this year, and I think Mike Tyson said it well. Those plans are, your plans are really good till you get punched in the face, and we've really been punched in the face by injuries this year. We've lost the most star games. We've lost the most wins. You can measure it a whole bunch of different ways, but the coaching staff, Nick, Tyrese, the whole roster, but I'm calling out those two in particular, have kept us in position. The new structure of the playoffs, I think, was really built for us this year, which is we're going to have most likely all three guys tonight. That'll be hopefully our 8th game where they're together and they actually finish the game together. touch wood, as our Australian training staff guy tells me all the time. So we still think this can be a special season. That said, I think in my job, I have to focus on both the now and the future, and we wanted to accomplish 3 goals: get younger, get players who can help us now and into the future, and then the ability to retain them. And all those moves in concert did that.
You brought up the injuries during that answer. Why has there been such a disconnect between what's being communicated publicly and I guess the actual extent of those injuries? So like we could go down a list. Joel, it's been a lot of vagueness with, well, he might be back now, and then he's out for a couple weeks. And then there's, Caleb, who just got traded. He was listed as questionable for you guys, Tuesday or whatever it was. And now Dallas is amending their trade and saying we have to wait another few weeks for him to play. There's Paul with the pinky. Mm-hmm. So what is the source of that disconnect between what you guys are saying and the impact that those injuries are having on the court?
Yeah, I'll start with Joel, because I think that's a very reasonable question given all the stuff we've gone through. So I'll start with Joel. So there have been those times where, sincerely, Joel himself, medical staff, he looks every much on the way towards playing. And then primarily his injury is one where you're managing his symptoms, swelling and pain. And, when those things happen, it's best for him to sit out. I know that Joel is doing everything he can and fighting to be out there as much as possible, and I think you heard his answer. He believes in this team. He believes in how it can come together, and he was praising of Tyrese and others who have kept us in it. If he's not out there, it's because his symptoms aren't allowing him to be out there. And I wouldn't accept the premise of your question somewhat, except that, yes, it often looks like he's about to play and then he doesn't, and that's just because we're managing symptoms. On this injury that he had last February and he had the procedure on, it's one that you manage symptoms, and we're optimistic long term, talking to the doctors, and our understanding from talking with multiple experts, I think we're 7, 8, 9, 10 at this point of the top people in the world all see this as one that over time will improve, but it's happened slower than anyone's anticipated. But we love how Joel's fighting, but that's been to address your question directly. On Caleb, I'm taking that separate. So long term, there's agreement that he's fine. Both the Dallas and Philadelphia medical staff had many discussions about where Caleb's at, which happens as part of a trade. There's full agreement on where he's at. He has sort of a nagging sort of injury. He was scheduled to play for us. Dallas is concerned that it's uncertain, like how soon he'll be back. They were concerned that nagging injury might last a little longer than anticipated, but long-term everyone agrees he's fine, which is why the trade went through. But to acknowledge that, hey, you might not have this guy on day one, that's where we amended the trade and it went through.
So just to be clear with Joel, you guys are looking at this as an actual injury and not a condition necessarily that will be chronic in nature, and as an extension of the one he initially suffered against Golden State or whatever it was.
I think left knee injury management is almost perfect. In fact, there's been a lot of discussion with, and even the league office is very focused on stars, like what he should be listed at, and that is the right term. And yes, this has been since that injury and that procedure where we have to constantly manage it. It should improve over time. In fact, it's anticipated to improve over time. That's been slower than we thought. We do think there will be a place in the future where the symptoms in that are reduced or go to zero, but we're still in the middle of that where we have to manage it, and it's going to be based on symptoms, whether or not he's out there. Right now, he feels like he's in a great place, and it looks like it's in a great place. So we're excited for the stretch run where we might finally see this group together of our 3 stars, Paul, Joel, and Tyrese. And we feel like that team has a real shot. We've made our path to win harder, obviously. We're going to have to fight to probably get in the playoffs, and then we're going to have to fight to beat a very good team in the first round. But we feel like we would have had to play that team at some point to win the title anyway. And we're just focused on championship. And I know you have to squint a little, but we feel like this group can still do that.
So when you're navigating as a executive who's charged with winning the season and kind of forecasting the future and how to best approach that, and you're doing your due diligence and talking to teams and finding out, I assume you do it on everybody. What can we get for this? What would it take for this? How much is Embiid's future factoring into that? Because obviously there's some uncertainty with regards to the team, and we've seen it throughout his career here. It's a huge difference if he's a part of it regularly or not. So when you're kind of deciding what to do and what path to take and what deals to do, how much of a concern or a thought is it? Here's what we're expecting out of Joel moving forward.
Players like Joel are so special. I mean, I think it was great. He reminded us his greatness with a triple-double after being out for many weeks. I'd say you look at a lot of these teams that are above us in the standings, have young players that are improving and are playing well right now. They're all hoping one of their guys becomes a top player in the world, a top 5 player in the world, because that is required to win the championship. It doesn't happen without one of these special players. And so we're building around Joel. We built around Joel. We continue to plan to build around Joel because he's the special player that can help us win the championship. We think Paul's a great fit. We think Tyrese is a great fit. What I'm excited about with Tyrese is what he's added this year. His defense has materially improved, both eye test and data. That's so important to us. That's in this down season so far. There have been a lot of positive. I talk about this before the season that while you have guys out, you're going to have a few things. One is Tyrese had maybe a bumpy start like our whole roster did. But he's material added defense. He's material added playmaking, in particular drive and kick. So we see him as a key piece going forward as well. Obviously, much younger. But Joel is core to everything we do. And we believe he's the right guy to build around. We believed it this offseason. We believed it based on what we knew about his whole situation, and we believe that he, Tyrese, and Paul can win a championship. We'll see if that turns out to be true, and it doesn't look easy to spot how it's going to work exactly right now, given the path we've given ourselves, but we believe in that.
Daryl, when you emphasized a couple times about one of your goals was getting younger, the play of guys like Justin, Adem, Ricky, did it almost reinforce that? Because a lot of people don't want to play their young guys and think that you can't win the big stuff with young players. Did that impact?
Yeah, it's one thing that Nick has done a great job with is bringing these guys along. Obviously, our hand has been forced with how few players have been available at times. But his ability to integrate a 19-year-old into our rotation and still play at a high level, Nick's done a great job. So we think Quentin and Jared can add right into that group. And we feel like a younger, more dynamic group around Tyrese, Joel, Paul is the path. And we did that with Grimes and Jared. And then obviously we added Yaba this offseason. I think another way to think about it is, and I mentioned this before, we think that having 3 elite players like Paul, Joel, and Tyrese is the way to go. Because we see our job is finding the Yabus, finding the Justins, those things you can find. You can't find Paul Georges, you can't find Joel Embiid's, and you can't find Tyrese Maxey's. What you can do is have a front office and a coaching staff that works tirelessly to find these guys who can then fit around it. And yes, I felt like we needed to get younger, and so that was one of the goals of this deadline.
You just mentioned Gershon. It's obviously you have a lot of games left to play, but are you confident that you can retain him in the offseason?
I don't think you can ever be confident on unrestricted free agent, but we feel very good. He loves it here. We love him. We just freed up more, more with Caleb's contract going out. We freed up more room in the future, so we feel very good about retaining Yabu.
I guess if you do have to use portions of that non-taxpayer on him, how confident are you on staying under that first apron?
For next season, you're saying? I don't think that's not a priority I've been given. Obviously, we went well over it, and the plan really was to be over it this year. But in this season we were in, we thought the best plan was what we did at the deadline, obviously. So I don't see any constraints. I've been given no constraints about what we spend next season.
I guess what I'm saying, if that becomes a hard cap next year because you use that non-taxpayer, are you confident in your position to stay under that hard cap?
I see. I now see what you're asking. I think that's something we just have to map out. I haven't thought about that one as much. But the reality is we knew prior to the deadline we had less ability to retain, and post we have more ability to retain. So.
Daryl, when you talk about this season not going to plan because of the injuries, what was it like weighing the temptation trade deadline to let it play out? Obviously, you guys had a plan in place in the summer that you guys really never got to see. I wonder if that's a temptation that weighed on you to see what it would look like with KJ, Caleb back, and all the other guys here, or
Just not making any trades, you're saying?
or trying kind of standing pat and letting what was built in the summer have some time to maybe develop.
I see what you're saying. I think we have very few opportunities to upgrade the team, and we did feel like Grimes is an overall long-term better fit, both age and game. So we saw that opportunity to upgrade the team, so we did. And then we thought, obviously we've had our eyes on Jared for quite some time, so we thought he could be a player as well. So long way of saying, I don't really go into any deadline or draft. We just have these very short windows to upgrade the team. I feel like you almost always have to upgrade the team if you have a chance, and usually you do.
He's probably not going to factor into the picture the rest of this year, of course, but you talk about young talent, and there's 20-year-old Jared McCain. I'm wondering, clearly he sort of surpassed expectations. What he did in that 23-game sample, how does that change your long-term outlook of how he sort of fits into all of this?
Yeah, I went into the Grimes move, for example, as well. Obviously, we're focused on this season and making it a special year that we had planned, and we have that ability to do that. So that's why I hadn't mentioned Jared McCain yet. But we do think Grimes fits both with Tyrese this season, and then as you go forward, we wanted one of our guards to be able to take the primary guard matchup. We felt like Quentin could do that both with Jared and Tyrese going forward. Jared was the odds-on favorite, some 50% to win the Rookie of the Year when he went out. Generally, those players take the biggest step forward into their second year. So, again, I have to look at the future, even though we're focused mostly on now. But we feel like we're extremely well set up, even more next year, because we're getting a possible Rookie of the Year level player coming back next season.
There's been talk about whether Tyrese and Jared is a sort of formidable enough backcourt defensively with supposedly a lack of size. Do you view that as sort of a viable long-term backcourt?
Definitely viable. I do think that kind of a structure creates defensive challenges, but I do believe in, Nick, one of his strengths is his ability, ball pressure. He can get that out of even guys that might be thought of as challenged defensively. I know Tyrese was maybe thought of that way, and this year I think shows what he can do. And then also, look, Joel is a pretty big force, and one of the reasons our defense has taken a big step back is when you have a ball pressure defense, but you don't have the Joel Embiid behind, or even Drummond, who's been out so much as well. That really puts a lot of pressure on your defense, and that's been one of our big issues. But as you map forward, and to be frank, we're only going to win the championship if all three of our big three are healthy. it should work well, we think.
Nick, you brought up Paul's fit and being happy with, still how that works with Tyrese and Joel, but presumably part of the reason you pay a guy like that a lot of money is to help hold the fort without Joel and to, win those bridge games with Maxey. Why do you think it has not gone to plan in that way when Joel has missed games where Paul's been out there with Tyrese?
Yeah, I think we wish we had held the fort a little better, but I think if you really, it hasn't just been Joel. I mean, one of the big reasons we thought we could hold the fort was Drummond. One of them was Paul, as you mentioned. Both have missed significant time. I could keep going, sadly, with injuries this year. We seem to have hit snake eyes on injury. We've had a good history with injuries, but this year's been I meant overall roster-wise. I know Joel's had some challenges. Long way of saying, I think Nick and the players have held it together. If you really adjust for all the guys who have been out, if it had just been Paul, Joel out, and all the rest there, I think we'd have held this together with many more wins. But it's been just the mass of it all building up. And I am most focused on how we look when they're all together. And when they're all together, we're 6-1. When they finish the game, tonight will hopefully be game number 8. And we always thought of as Paul as the best fit when they're all together. But I don't disagree with your statement that we also need Tyrese and Paul to carry us in those games when Joel's out.
Do you feel like personally you still have the kind of faith of ownership to see this through? And have you felt the need at all to kind of resell them on the vision? Or what's the dynamic like when the magnitude of these decisions at the trade deadline are coming up?
Yeah, I do. Obviously, that's a better question for Josh when you get him. But they've only been super supportive, super engaged, super involved. Really believe in what we have put together, believe in myself and Elton, believe in Nick, believe in what we've put together. I understand that belief's been tested for all of us in a tough year, but I see no waiver in that.
It was a wild deadline. I mean, obviously
was,
across
yeah.
the league. Was there anything, whether it was Luke or what the Cavs did or take your pick, was there anything that kind of altered your view of the competitive landscape in the NBA and where you guys fit into that?
Well, I think a lot of these, obviously, the media has to judge right away. That's your job, the discourse, right? But it is, you wish you could do the grades. And I've seen this lately. I actually really encourage it where folks have looked a year back. I think those are more interesting for me in the front office. I do think a lot of those big moves, the stories yet to be written, you see them and you say there's got to be more going on, and it usually comes out over time. I would say just writ large, probably the biggest thing is that people working hard, and I know this because our front office did too, we're able to maneuver around all the new rules, and that's why I always talk about the importance of the league office. They set the rules that we sort of live under, and all these teams are getting more creative to work around them. So it's really important what rules they set, and I think they've done more of a good job than not. I think you could find a few things, but so I would say just the ability to maneuver has been a little bit easier than maybe even I would have anticipated.
Did anything, in terms of the value of draft picks that were going around, there's a lot of talk about the Lakers not having to give up that second first. It seemed like the Hunter return might have been a little light, historically speaking. Did anything that you saw is there a change there at all?
I do think there's been there's a dynamic on how draft picks are being valued and how upside is being valued versus average return versus variance, and the NFL went through this too actually. And then there's also some kinks in how much certain draft picks are paid and how valuable picks in certain ranges are. For example, the talent drops off in the first round faster than how much you have to pay them. So there are these picks outside of the first few that, like the NFL, it used to be the top picks were less valuable because they didn't have any sort of scale. Now that we have a scale, I think NBA scale is a little off, where it's those picks right outside the first few that you could argue the cost of them doesn't match the return. And then also I think there's this debate on second rounders versus first rounders, and we did a trade where we feel like the second rounders we got will help us upgrade the team more than the first. But there are teams on the other side. So there's a whole dynamic happening. The NFL's been more interesting. Their sort of chart's been off for 15 to 20 years, and it's only finally getting into a spot. And I think the NBA, that's one of the advantages the front office can still do. There are these mispricing of draft picks, and it's our only currency. So, as the league gets more sophisticated, that's still one of the areas that front offices can create an edge potentially.
When I want to ask you to comment on Luka specifically, but when a five-time All-NBA player at age 25 gets moved, do you think to yourself, like, are we showing enough urgency? Like, are we doing enough? Because I think the usual logic is, well, players of that caliber aren't going to move, and so you don't focus on what people would say is like a fantasy trade. But when that actually happens, and then that creates this domino effect, and you guys mostly are working more margin type trades, does that change your mindset at all of like what we could be doing to upgrade the team?
Well, I think I would just say we've had those moments where we're in those big moves where it's, and end up with Paul George, and I've been involved in those trades over my career quite a bit. So I would say there always is an urgency. This year, just because of the dynamics, we weren't involved. But I don't think that's like something that will map forward necessarily. We'll see, but. So yeah, I guess I would disagree. I think there's a lot of dynamics, and that's why I think with the big Lakers Dallas trade, it just feels like there's going to be more to that story. We'll see. Although it's been already heavily discussed, it was clearly the biggest move, and you could argue for years. So
going back to the first round picks, you traded one pick that's almost guaranteed to be late in the first round for 4 picks that probably have a pretty good chance of being high. But it also impacts your flexibility on what first round picks are allowed to trade. How did all of that weigh in and what was the rationale?
yeah, we had to factor all that in, and sometimes hard to value optionality, like you mentioned. We felt very comfortable that if big moves still came, we could put together a good package if we needed to do that. But we felt like because that pick was very likely 28, 29, 30, that those 4 seconds, were going to be quite a bit above that, such that value made up for the other stuff we gave up. Yeah.
Reggie had been playing a pretty big role, kind of doing a two-headed monster thing with Kyle at point guard. Do you envision Jared doing something similar? And then on top of that, he's on a two-way, Justin's on a two-way. He's been starting, playing big rotation minutes. Are you comfortable with kind of where they are and your ability to possibly sign in the standard deals eventually?
Yeah, I think we'll have conversations with our representation, and it's already begun to potentially convert them. That's a two-way street where you have to work out something. So we'll see where that goes. Justin has many days left. Jared has fewer. We are potentially hitting up on a team limit, but we can work around that. So we see them as a big part of our future, and we hope to convert them at some point. We think they're good roster fits for long term.
One of the benefits of cutting salary is there's more players on the buyout market you can pursue. How much did that factor into your decision? How confident are you that you can pursue it and have someone that can help you?
It factored in. I would say it was nice to have. That market has been limited, I'd say, the past few years and maybe this year. We're just going to go with the best player. It did open up some optionality of possible players, but right as I sit here right now, we don't see one that would fit that opened up. Yeah.
The Embiid extension. Obviously.
Yeah.
don't want to use the word regret because he can't control me necessarily, and he's a valuable member of the organization. But just from the outside looking in, optically it looks like, oh man, like why would they? If his knee was as questionable as it is, why would they do that? Obviously, that's not one of those decisions where I would assume you're making on your own. Or organizationally, has there been any questioning of the due diligence that was done, or where what's been the reaction to that?
No, we thought it was the right move at the time. We think it's the right move now. Again, with just NBA history coming involved here, that you don't win without one of these special players. You don't get to add a Paul George unless he knows that they're going to be together for long term. The feedback we got from, like I mentioned, so many medical staff is that this is something that is manageable and over time should improve. So we thought it was the right decision.
Take one more.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.